Could potentially be a controversial one. Before we look at this, ladies and gentlemen, this is just data. Okay, I'm just reading what's in front of me. That's all. That's it. I'm just reading what's in front of me. I'm not inserting any opinion here. This is just the data in front of me. Let's take a look at bursts. Hard data on the peak damage from each spec and comp. A new stat, burst DPS, is now available on WoW Arena logs, which allows you to analyze how bursty each spec and comp is in various brackets. We define burst DPS as the peak DPS done within a 3-second window during a match that was won. This includes damage done by pets, but excludes damage done to pets. Only looking at winning matches is to minimize the cases where no burst rotation was done. Okay, now here we go. The most bursty specs in solo shuffle. Coming in at number 1, we have Retribution Paladin. Burst DPS, 228,000 DPS. The number 1 heavy hitter. Retribution Paladin. I think this is a surprise to many of us that their burst damage is this high. Okay, so we got burst damage, 228,000 DPS. That's crazy. Next up, we have the Devastation Evoker. Okay, Devastation Evoker coming in hot with the 215,000 burst DPS. Devastation Evokers right now, I think, do some of the most insane damage. If they crit, they just win the game, pretty much. You have like 5 different abilities that can just one-shot. Deep Breath can one-shot. Flame Breath can one-shot. Using Dragon Rage for the triple pyre can one-shot. You got one-shots coming out of the wazoo if you get crits. So very surprising here. We got Devastation Evoker. Then we have Ellie Shaman coming at a peak DPS of 170,000. Average DPS 17,000. Yeah, Ellie Shaman's, I'm playing that right now. Sitting in queue, long queue, but yeah, very interesting. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is... We define burst DPS as peak DPS done within a 3-second window during a match that was won. Damage done by pets, but excludes damage done to pets. So this does not include pad, as a lot of people like to say. After the Ellie Shaman, you have Marks Hunter. I think we've all been one-shot by Marks Hunters. It goes without saying, there's ways to stop Marks Hunter damage, but yep. If you do not pay attention to it, you will get one-shot. Frost Death Knights as well. They grip everybody in. They use their swirly, slappy hands. They throw a dragon. They... obliterating you for 100k. They can do a lot of damage as well. Boomkin. This is a bit surprising to see Boomkin burst so high, especially when it's not pad. That's very interesting. You have Windwalker Monk, obviously really crazy damage, followed up by Fury Warrior. You have Enhancement Shaman. Wow. Fire Mage. That Fire Mage is kind of a bit surprising to me. I would have anticipated Havoc, Demon Hunter, then Fire Mage. So with the 3 mage specs, you have Fire, Arcane, and Frost. That's kind of interesting. It's all very close, though. Look at that. 144k to 140k is the difference between the best and worst mage spec when it comes to burst damage in particular. That's kind of interesting. I guess Combustion still is kind of king when it comes to DPS. But I would have thought that Arcane would have been higher, to be honest with you. Frost isn't really a bursty spec. If you get like a big glacial, it can be bursty, but for the most part, you're just slapping Ice Lances, right? You're slapping Ice Lances, so your overall DPS is really good, I would say, but yeah. I'm really surprised about Fire Mage. Like, Fire Mage consistent damage and burst damage doesn't seem that bad. Kind of crazy. The average DPS of the 3 mage specs, Fire Mage 10k, 13k, 12k, Ret Paladin 21k. Yeah, so Mage right now in terms of like consistent damage isn't necessarily the best. I mean, that's just what the data would suggest, right? Just looking at the data. Next up, you have Arms Warriors coming in at a peak DPS of 138,000. That's got to be when they like set up for their big Mortal Strike or whatever. Overall DPS is actually lower than I would have thought too for an Arms Warrior, which is very interesting. I thought Arms Warriors would have had more consistent damage than that, but I guess they're very just like bursty with their Colossus Smash or whatever. You have Destro Warlocks, Pharaoh Druids. Pharaoh Druids another one. I thought their peak DPS would be a lot higher once they have all their bleeds rolling. You can see their overall DPS is strong, but you know their one-shot ability is a little bit lower. And I think that's where most of these classes should kind of fall, to be honest with you. Like, I do think even like Arms Warrior is a little too bursty, but even like Frost Mage, I feel like this is kind of like the sweet spot for average DPS. I think that there's a lot that is really super interesting about this data, actually, because I do feel like certain classes, like the consistent damage of a Frost Mage doesn't feel bad. So maybe that's kind of how it should be, right? Like your peak DPS should only be like 130, 140k, and maybe your average consistent DPS should be like more like 14k, something like that. I don't really know. I don't know exactly what it should be, but when I play my Frost Mage, it doesn't feel like my damage is bad, and it also doesn't feel like I just one-shot people, which is kind of nice. It doesn't feel bad to heal into either when I'm playing healer. You have Destro, you have Feral, Survival Hunter, Unholy Death Knight. Unholy Death Knight lower on the burst end, but really high on the consistent damage end. Same with Affliction Warlock. You have Demo Warlock, Shadow Priest, Subtlety Rogue. That Subtlety Rogue is extremely surprising to me. That it's so... Subtlety Rogue, I mean, obviously you have a lot of control, but your consistent damage is really garbanzo beans. And the peak burst. This is surprising because I feel like Subtlety Rogue sometimes with like secret and technique and stuff like that, they get absolutely insane one-shots. But maybe it's just like people are learning how to respond to it. And if they do respond to it, your damage just falls off a cliff. Outlaw, Prop Paladin, and then we're in kind of like, oh my God, you have the tanks. Ah, look at this. You have Prop Paladin DPS, 3.7k DPS as a Prop Paladin. Huh? That's interesting. That's like, it's like Resto Shaman DPS, dude. Prop Warrior, 16k DPS. You have Assassination Rogues. So it's interesting that Assassination Rogues consistent damage isn't too bad, but it's even lower than the tanks, which is kind of funny. It's kind of weird because I think Assassination Rogues aren't even that bad right now. I feel like they do a lot of damage. So that this is definitely surprising to me. I think maybe the big strength of the Assassination Rogue is the healing reduction. Maybe you don't do like the most DPS, although I feel like you do. You don't have the most burst. You just lower healing with double shiv, kidney shots and stuff, which is kind of crazy. Spec performance, very, very interesting to see the different bursts. And then you have coming in dead last, the lowest DPS spec in the game is Resto Druid. Feels bad, man. His Moonfires need buffs. But yeah, I think these top ones are kind of no surprise to anybody, to be honest with you. I'm a little bit surprised that Fire Mage doesn't have more... Like, traditionally, Fire Mage and Combust was like one of the craziest, most scary things in the entire game when it came to bursts. And that it seems like it's been toned down like quite a bit. And that's probably why you're not seeing as many Fire Mages. Burst just isn't as high as some of these other specs. The Rep Paladin, though, coming in at King #1. Crazy. But yeah, I think in general, I know this is what everybody wants. I think the game is a lot more reasonable when you're not seeing numbers like this, right? Like this shouldn't be a thing. The peak burst DPS is a little bit too high on, you know, some of these specs. The one-shot ability is a little bit too high. But obviously, if you nerf that, if you nerf this class's gimmick, like if you nerf the gimmick of the Rep Paladin one-shot and the gimmick of the Evoker one-shot, they kind of miss out on a lot of their win conditions because that's one of the only things that they have going for them, right? So they would need to be compensated and buffed in some other way. But yeah, really, really interesting data here. And I'm still in queue, by the way.